Our world continues to change and push us in ways we have not been challenged before. On this show, we talk about these challenges, how to be aware of them, face them, and overcome them in your life. This is David Waldas, creator of the Aligned Living System.
And I'm Nick Musica, Aligned Living Coach. Welcome to the Aligned Living System podcast.
Welcome to the Aligned Living System podcast. This is David Waldas here with Nick Musica. And today we're going to talk about triggers. I think it's most of our favorite topics, right? And so we might as well jump in with it. One of our favorite things to experience, that feeling when something happens and it hits something from our past and we just kind of see red or black out, or, it overrides our normal way of operating or our ability to navigate in our normal way. And so we've all had that experience. And it's something that when you start doing the aligned living work, that your relationship with triggers changes pretty dramatically. And we'll talk about it from a few perspectives too. I mean, because part of the reason triggers have so much control over us is it's part of our identity. We go, oh, this is hard for me. This is an area where I get triggered. It's how we've known ourselves. And so often our identity has a lot to do with our coping mechanisms. It has a lot to do with how we have experienced things in the past. And we go, oh, well, this is how I am in this situation. And so I know myself, right? We start doing this personal work, we get to know ourselves well and go, yeah, this is how I am here. But the truth is, like, this is how I've learned to be here. This is my coping mechanism. This is my trigger. This is my response to trauma, or however we're going to look at it. And so it's really interesting when triggers come in. We usually don't feel like we have a lot of control over what's happening. We kind of surrender to the experience. Maybe we fight it and go, God, I'm trying not to feel this way, but I am feeling this way. Starts to turn into that slippery slope, and we find ourselves, where our heart shut down, or our brain's spinning, or we're saying shit that we didn't want to say, or we're, leaving the situation and going home. Whatever our favorite response is, we're not really in our next right action at all. We're just going, stuff's happening and I'm reacting. And so we're going to talk a little bit to start with about what does the aligned living work have to do with this, because it's not so much about removing the triggers, but it is about creating an expansiveness inside of ourselves. And so let's say hi to Nick. We'll say good morning to Nick here, and then we'll talk a little bit more about that. So good morning, Nick. How you doing? You know anything about triggers?
I know nothing about triggers.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Congratulations.
just
That's great.
gave them up for Lent and they never came back
Yeah.
once. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, dude, that Catholic background is really helping you out.
Really helping. Yeah.
I'd never heard of somebody with Catholicism got rid of your triggers.
Yeah. I think I'm the only one. Yeah. I think it was like 7th or 8th grade. I was just like, can you do triggers? They said no, and I'm like, I'm giving it a shot. And ever since then, it's been fine. Yeah,
That's
no
great,
big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny how one of the great things about religion, is that it doesn't, helps us get rid of those triggers that seem to come out of nowhere based on.
Yeah. And they are alive and well. They always are. Yeah. It's just a matter of how much do you want to entertain them, really.
Yeah. And here's the thing with that too, right? We generally don't get to ask ourselves that question of how much do I want to let the trigger control, because the trigger is controlling.
Yeah.
And so this is really that discussion of internal bandwidth, really expansiveness internally. And for most of us, until we've done that expansiveness work, and maybe we even just know it to varying degrees, when a trigger comes in, say it's like we're kind of like trapped in a phone booth with it, like it happens, it triggers, we're in there, it takes over the room, no matter how big that room really is, and it's the only thing going on. We lose touch of our own usually ability to think and stabilize ourselves and to make grounded sound decisions. It basically presses play on the tape, starts that program, and we do our thing that
Yep.
Like it's a trigger. It literally triggers something, and we do the thing in response to that trigger. And so when we do this internal work and we create the spaciousness inside of ourselves, and most of us have experienced it at some point where we just feel big and expanded, and we feel a little bit more seaworthy, maybe, like things can happen and we're going to be okay. And sometimes we feel right.
Yeah.
And sometimes we feel a little bit more, just worn down or not in our full power, and we feel like we can handle stuff less.
Yeah.
And that usually is a feeling of how powerful we're feeling, right? How strong do I feel? How on top of myself do I feel?
Yeah.
And what we're talking about with expansiveness is a lot different. It's like this feeling inside of ourselves where it just feels like there's all this space. And that means that somebody could say something to us, and instead of it hitting the trigger, or somebody can do something, instead of it hitting the trigger, it just enters our internal space, and we go, oh, interesting. This is just one of the things in the room. And when it's just one of the things in the room, it doesn't get to take over. It doesn't get to be in charge because we still have our own efficacy to go, how does this compare with how I really think? How does
Yeah.
this compare with what's actually going on?
Yeah.
And then the trigger isn't really a trigger, it's a suggestion, it's an invitation. And like a trigger is never normally an invitation. A trigger is a press play on tape, run through this scenario, start the program. But when we
Yeah.
have that expansiveness, it goes, hey, I got an idea. Why don't you freak out about this? Why don't you feel small and deflated about this? Why don't you feel bad about yourself about this? And then we get to respond with it. And what I've found quite often, and when my deepest triggers come up, I'll feel them come in now and go, yeah, I am feeling a little bit shitty, but it's something, but I have the bandwidth, the wherewithal to sort through it. And it's not just a shutdown, and I would say for most of my triggers now, I can feel them come in and I can go, yeah, that's a trigger. That's not true. But there's probably 2 or 3 that I have that are just the deep ones. When they come in, I'm like, oh shit, that doesn't feel good. Okay, let me work with this a little bit. But there's still enough
Yeah.
expansiveness that it's not a run the program, press play on tape.
Yeah.
And I think I can remember when that first started to happen, right? Because it was through doing this work and like how powerful it felt when I'm like, oh my God, I'm not just going into my reaction. I'm not just going into this thing. I'm actually feeling it. It doesn't feel good, but I realize it's not the only thing in the room with me anymore.
So you had a different awareness of self, it sounds like, and what was coming into your ecosystem, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, and the difference, I always say like think about a text message you got where it pissed you off about something, right? You're walking
Yeah.
along through your day, having a good day. The text message comes in, you read it, and then your world just shrinks. Your
Yeah.
awareness just shrinks to that thing. Like, damn it, like this is, or somebody cuts you off in traffic, whatever, the thing is, and then your awareness just shrinks down to this one little thing. But
Yeah.
what happens when our awareness doesn't do that? And there's already all this space, that we're living in a mansion instead of a shack, really.
Yeah.
And inside that mansion, there's all this space. We know our way around. And we go, oh, yeah, there's an unexpected visitor, an uninvited visitor here. There's room in here for us to deal with this.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean that in the corporate world, at least where I came from, there was the equivalent there is self-awareness in the context of EQ.
Yeah.
But what they never talk about is the energetic component and what that may do for you. They may talk about you reacting in a certain way and what that means to someone
Yeah.
else.
Take a
Now
deep
they're in
breath,
a position.
count to 10.
Yeah, something like that. But the conversation of, and now it throws you off your energetic rocker, so to speak, axis, and now you're working to right yourself like that.
Yeah.
That's not part of the conversation. And
Yeah.
I think, let me know if, correct me if I'm wrong, is you're saying that is 100% the conversation.
Right. And while those mindfulness tools help, right? Like take a deep breath, center yourself.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
difference between being in a phone booth, with your biggest nemesis versus being in a mansion with your biggest nemesis is huge. And so,
yeah,
like, it's basically giving ourselves the space in order to use those tools. And so it is 2 very different things. The energetics of it before would say it just swarms you, overwhelms you, overcomes you, it's in charge. And
yeah,
okay, take a deep breath, count to 3, like whatever it is. But when it comes into your mansion, into your huge space, it just goes, it makes itself known, but there's just so much space in there that we could be really bad at mindfulness and still come out ahead,
yeah, yeah. There's a proactive portion that you're talking about and a reactive portion. Like that, there's a front end protect yourself because here's how I see myself now, and
Yeah,
here's how I get to deal with things now.
yeah.
And then we get to clean it up on the back end versus having nothing on the front end. And then
Mhm.
it's all clean up on the back end.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you brought that up too, because what is that when we have triggers and we walk through the world and we don't know how to have the space inside to deal with them? We just go, shit, I hope that trigger doesn't come in because I know what happens to me. I know myself in that trigger. Like the world feels a lot less safe because we're, well, I know how to deal with it. I have my escape plan, whatever
Yeah.
defense it is.
Yeah.
But when we feel that expansiveness internally, the world's a lot safer place because we know
Totally.
we can handle whatever's going to happen in a very different way. And when we don't have the space internally, we also know how we're going to handle it, and it's probably not going to be the way we want to.
Yeah. And you just used the word hope. So young in my career, I was in a meeting and my boss's boss said, "So how's that project going, Nick?" And I said, "Well, sentence. So I hope for next week, the deadline we talked about. I hope it gets done." He said, "Hope. So you have no control over that, huh?" Right. And so when we right then, which is the I hope that trigger doesn't do it to me again this time. Well,
Yeah,
if you're saying hope, then chances are it's going to. And
yeah,
so let's talk about that front end and start to reshape the system so that there's no hope is not part of that. It's we step into the driver's seat and we get to do something about it.
yeah, absolutely. And it is, I mean, it's such a hard thing to wrap your head around too without the experience. Um, but I think we all have had experiences where we felt like there's enough space inside of ourselves where something happened and we found ourselves not react and just
Yeah.
watch it and see it. And
Yep.
and so like that's a glimpse of it, but it's something that's so different because it's just like how powerful it feels to have that much room inside yourself to just go, oh, interesting. Whereas before the answer would have been, well, my eyes turn red and I start screaming, or whatever,
Yeah.
whatever
Yeah. Or
it is.
disassociate yourself from it versus being present with it and dealing with it in the moment as it's happening simply as best you can sometimes.
Yeah. And then you can feel it too, right? Because before
That's
you're
right.
not even feeling it, you're just feeling your reaction to it. And so, these triggers actually get that expansiveness gives us the space to heal them and work through them, to lessen them. And then when we combine that expansiveness with a trigger that's been worked through a lot, we can go, oh, look at that. And I mean, I've seen this in clients, and I can remember that feeling myself where something would happen and it would be really shitty. And I would find myself start to smile and go, oh my God, I'm not freaking out. Like, this is absolutely horrible. And it's probably really weird that I'm smiling right now, but I'm just so damn happy that I'm not freaking out by something that used to absolutely make me freak out because I realize I'm actually in charge now. And that was never the case when this kind of thing would happen. And
Yeah.
so, like, yeah, well, that sucks that that's happening, but that smile is about feeling in control of our own lives and our own destiny, really, because
Yeah.
when we are not doing the thing automatically that we used to do, or that we, just have some efficacy over it, like, damn, like it starts to help us trust our future, helps us trust ourselves, and feel safer in the world, safer with what we're creating, and more stabilized. And then
Yeah.
that builds on the next thing, and it makes us feel that much more expanded, and so it creates this,
Totally.
expansion
Totally.
upon expansion.
Yeah. 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 It accumulates. It builds on itself for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, I remember our earlier conversations hiking a lot of the times and talking about whatever it may have been. And and it felt heavy for me. I couldn't even give you a good example at this point, like, but the topic felt maybe a little heavy for me. And we got to a point of the conversation where things were clear, like, and
mhm,
here's what could be done about it.
yeah,
And your capping statement of so fun. And I'm like, so fun. Like we just talked about such an uncomfortable thing, and so fun was the last thing that came out of your mouth. And then I started to identify with so fun, just not like fun, but for the perspective of the appreciation of the outcome. Because
yeah.
it,
It's a
it
different sort
wasn't
of fun. Like,
to,
I can actually navigate this. This is fun.
yes,
Horrible. There's
yes.
something horrible happening, but it's fun that I can navigate it. It's fun that I can keep my wherewithal.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's just a way different way of operating in whatever that uncomfortable thing is, because we're not getting rid of uncomfortable things anytime soon, right? They're not magically going away.
Yeah.
So um here's a very real way to deal with those things and get better at dealing with those things.
Mhm.
And it's a skill, it's a change in the operating system, it's a change in your energy, it's all these things that come into play. And the more you do it, the better you get at it, the smaller those things are.
Yeah, absolutely. And that falls in line with it. I feel like I might have mentioned this on here last week or one of the last recordings too. I was working with a client, we were talking about that seeking relief, like, well, when this happens. And I was saying, like, that relief's bullshit, right? All it does is we're just going to replace it with the next thing. But when we have trust in ourselves to navigate it and faith that things are aligning for us, like that changes everything. Then we don't need the relief because we know however it plays out is going to be perfect, and that we're
Yeah.
going to be able to handle it. We're going to be able to navigate it. We can trust. This is about our own expansion again, and to just keep seeking relief. When we're doing that, we're always going to be making decisions that are not about creating the best outcome, that are not about stepping to our greatest self,
No,
but are about
no.
shortcutting. How do I get this to feel okay now? And when we have that expansiveness, we don't need things to feel okay now because they already feel okay. And it may be the same level of stress or the same level of asking us to not feel okay. But when we have that internal space, we already feel okay. And so we don't compromise. We don't take the steps in order to alleviate the thing that's not there anymore, which is the discomfort.
Yeah, 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 for sure. And there's some levels, at least for me, there's some levels of management of yourself, like day to day, week to week, month to month. Like you can't walk into a high stressful, high triggered situation running on fumes. Chances are you're going to react poorly. So making sure that you are treating yourself well throughout your day, throughout your week, throughout your month, and knowing when the right time is to take care of yourself and just take a respite from things, so that you can be in this space in the phone booth where when something comes into your system that you're holistically, for lack of a better word, able to handle the situation as best as possible.
Yeah. And it's funny, like I'm in New York City right now. As a kid, when I'd come here, like my parents always thought it was a coincidence. Within 2 days of being in New York City, I'd start getting the flu. I'd be throwing up, and
Mm,
there's just so much stimulus, so much coming at
yeah,
you, and
yeah,
I didn't have the ability. I grew up on a dead end dirt road, in the middle of nowhere, and I had very little stimulus. I had no idea how to hold my own space in stimulus like that, in that external world. And like, obviously New York's probably one of the biggest stimulus places in the US. And so it's kind of fun to be here and walking around now and having all this, again, expansiveness, seeing all the craziness going on around me, all that stimulus. But what used to make me throw up within a couple of days is just like something that's happening out there. And
yeah.
that's like like it's been really fun to be here and have that expansiveness and just go, oh, interesting. I'm just walking down a busy street. There's people screaming. There's construction going on. I just stepped over a puddle of piss.
Whatever.
Just,
Yep, yep.
it's just what's going on.
It's
Beautiful.
true. Yeah,
Uh,
it's what it is.
right. And that is that expansiveness. And so, to be here, be comfortable, be relaxed, to feel, like I need to be very intentional, but to be able to feel safe and relaxed and comfortable and not stimulated in the midst of all the stimulus, like that is, the exact playing out of what we're talking about here, of having that
Yeah,
internal space.
yeah. And you can really create some cool things when you build uh when you build the skills to move through uncomfortable situations and you
Mhm.
can navigate through them. And this is where I think a lot of people
And stay
fall down.
present.
Yeah, like a lot of people, we're all going to fall down.
Mhm.
Not everyone's going to get up,
Yeah.
right? And so when and getting up repeatedly, because you're going to fall down repeatedly. The more you go into challenging situations, the more you're going to fall down. It's going to be
What it looks like.
challenging.
Yeah.
It's what happens.
Yeah.
It's part of the deal. So with this tool, with the Align Living, you have a way better chance of tackling the bigger things and moving through them to create something really quite lovely for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I love that you brought that up too, because it also brings up upper limiting. And I know, like, as I've grown my business, I started out with like, I love working one-to-one with people. I want to be the guy behind the guy,
Mm,
and that was like how I built my business. And then I started doing some groups. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, this is good. And then I started, just like, each time that I kind of moved to the next level with it, and then I've had to expand myself. I've had to create more bandwidth inside myself for it to feel good. And that same piece of, if I don't trust myself to navigate this, and like even like the group programs, for a long time they were curriculum based, like, okay, we're going to do this week 1, week 2, week 3. Whereas with my one-to-ones, I'd have an idea, but I'd open up, and be able to channel through, this is what we're doing. But with the groups, I felt like I couldn't quite do that because there was just a little bit too much stimulus, a little bit too much coming at me. And then now I've found, like, oh, I can just do that in the groups. And so now my group's turning into masterminds too, because we can do it for 6 months or for a year, because it's not about creating curriculum. It's about opening up, letting the information come through. And so as that bandwidth has expanded, I've felt, like more like I can be myself and just do my natural state of things in an environment that's asking more of me. And so when we often upper limit by going, this is too much, I'm not quite ready for this, or I'm not ready for that. Maybe we don't tell ourselves that, but we may self-sabotage, we may limit, we may think smaller. But that expansiveness allows us to just keep growing and getting bigger and be more ourselves, be more free in it. And I'm sure we've all had that experience where when we feel like something more is asked of ourselves, we stop being quite so free. We start to kind of operate maybe in old patterns, or maybe a little less effective. We don't feel as free in our body. And all of that's connected. Like, it's really pretty miraculous. And I love talking about this today, because these aren't the things we often think about when we go, oh, I'm really working with my consciousness, learning how to stabilize within myself and not get so pushed around by the world. But the idea that now there's all this space inside here, and so I get to engage with the world and actually let more of it in, because it's not the same threat it was. Whereas when you first start the work, it's usually like, okay, stop all that shit from coming in. This is just too much. Oh, here I am. I can finally find myself in here and stop the chaos. As we reach a certain level of expansion, we're like, okay, now let's let it back in, because now we're big enough to handle it. And it's a really interesting process that we go through. It starts with reprieve, and then it's like, well, great. Now I can let it back in because I'm bigger than it.
I'm hearing tools to deal with the world as it is, not how we would prefer it to be. Right.
Right. I was joking about that, and I always get this image of like bailing the ocean with a 5-gallon bucket, right? When we're trying to get the world to be how we prefer it to be, it's like, the tides keep coming in, we got our bucket and we're throwing it, and it just runs back into the ocean. And then the tide goes out and we're like, ooh, I think it's working, and then 6 hours later, the tide comes back in, and we're like, shit, that was the tide. That wasn't it working. But, I always joke with clients like, okay, here's your bucket. There's the ocean, go bail. Or we can start looking at this a little bit differently. Get to work. The tide's coming in.
You choose. Change the paradigm. Deal with it as it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
Well, cool. Yeah, this and again, like, if this is interesting to you, which it should be, right? This is all of our experiences. There's lots of resources on here, and of course, there's the one-to-one and group stuff too. And I am really excited. I'm actually getting ready to launch my masterminds too, that actually flow out of the 10-week group program.
Nice.
That we can just continue going deeper. And so it's been really fun to just kind of expand what I feel like I want to offer that feels in alignment with what people need. And that never even occurred to me to do before, because I didn't have that expansiveness where it was something that I could hold and really see how the moving parts and how I could support people and what it would do for them. And so now as that's expanded, it's like, well, of course I need to do that. And it's just so funny, right? Like, not even an option, not even thought about, to like, oh, why aren't I doing this? This is silly to not do this.
Yeah.
Just
fantastic. Yeah, it sounds super cool.
Yeah, it's gonna be a lot of fun. Awesome, man. So reach out with questions, check out the resources. There's free ones, there's deeper dive ones that you can just sign up for as well. And always great to have you listening. Thanks so much. Have a great week.
Thanks, folks.
We hope you enjoyed listening to today's podcast. And if you did, please subscribe so you can catch the next episode. If you want to learn more about the Aligned Living System and how it could support you in your life, check out davidwaldas.com.